Welcome to the Teachers on Fire podcast, where I profile agents of growth and transformation in education today. Each guest shares their highs, their lows, their passions, their goals, and the resources that are shaping their thinking and inspiring their practice. For show notes and links from each episode, visit teachersonfire.net. You can also follow the show at Teachers on Fire on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And of course, please subscribe to the show wherever you listen to podcasts. I'm your host, Tim Cavey. Let's meet today's guest. Today, I'm speaking with Shane Lawrence. Shane is a high school educator in Alberta, Canada, and producer of the Ed podcast. Follow Shane on Twitter at the Ed podcast. Shane, thanks so much for coming on the show today. Are you ready to talk education?
Dude, I am on fire.
All right, sounds good, Shane. Why don't you start by telling us a little bit more about your current context in education? What does that look like?
My current context is I am a teacher in Edmonton, Alberta. I teach junior and senior high, mostly junior high. I do some drama, art 7 for the first time this year. We'll probably get into that later because it's terrifying me. Computers 7 and 8. And then my baby, my world's favorite course. If you listen to my podcast, you already know that I talk about it way too much, but I do film studies 8 through 12. That's me in a nutshell.
That is a good collection. I hope we are able to come back to the computers. I'd love to hear more about what you're getting into there, particularly coding and some related subjects there. But first of all, Shane, it's story time. So please share with us about a low moment or an experience of adversity that you faced somewhere in your teaching or education career and describe how you overcame it.
Okay. This is so fair warning. This is dark, man. This is the adverse moment of my career.
Get real, man. Get real.
Oh, I've never told this story before, so I'm
okay.
I don't know if I'm excited to share a little trepidation, but here's what it was. So years ago, when I first started teaching at the school that I'm still at now, I got involved with the musical theater program, and the musical theater program at the time was big, and then it got bigger. I mean, it's a beast. We're a small school, but we do musical productions that far outstrip schools 4 or 5 times our size.
Right.
It's just the way things have worked out, and largely due to the efforts of the head of our musical theater program, she's just talk about Teachers on Fire. This lady is just like unstoppable. She's amazing. So I got on board with this and started co-directing with her right out of the gate when I came out of university. So in the third year that I was co-directing with her, we were doing West Side Story, and it was kind of my baby. It was the one that I selected. I wanted to do it. I love the music. I love the story. It's just great. And I had a real vision for it. And so we were working on this, and it's really demanding. It's a lot of time during school, after school, weekends. And then it happened that the lady who runs the musical theater program, her father became very ill. And so she had to go and, be with them and family. And it was out of country. So I wound up by and large doing the production on my own. And it was extremely intense. I mean, we talk about work-life balance, and I mean, there's no such thing as 50-50. There's times where work is going to be, it's like 70-30, and sometimes it's going to be 30-70. It's like,
right.
But it because I was on my own. I mean, I was designing sets, I was building sets, I was, making costume selections, I was choreographing scenes, I was directing, I was blogging, I was just doing just everything. And, I sat down at one point and figured out that I was working on just the musical 60 hours a week.
Oh my gosh.
Plus the rest of my job. Yeah, it was. So I was probably working close to like 100 hours a week for 2-3 months.
Oh.
And I mean, there's unhealth and there's unhealth. I mean, I get to places where, like in the year when I'm, now when I'm doing my film studies, where, my wife knows for 2 weeks, like I'm pretty much unavailable. But that's fine. We anticipate and we work around it, and it's fine. But this was well beyond that. It got to the point where, I was just a walking, I don't know what, a mess. I was an absolute mess. Obviously my teaching suffered. I was short and angry with my students. My kids at one point, it went to a dark place. I mean, we had a cat at the time, and the cat actually cut me down my wrist. And then the next day I was moving some scaffolding because we built our set out of scaffolding, so all metal, and I scratched myself again right beside that, or cut myself right beside that other cut on my wrist. So my kids are looking at me and they're thinking, "Is Mr. Lawrence okay?" I mean, I was not okay. They knew I was not okay. I was in a dark place, like really dark. So they saw this. I mean, I was not considering harming myself. I wasn't going to commit suicide or anything horrible like that. But they saw that and they're like, "Oh my gosh," and because it seemed plausible to them.
Right.
That's where I was at. And of course, at home, my relationship was not going well. My wife would be trying to, connect with me, and I would literally just not hear her. I would just have the music of West Side Story in my head. I would just start humming tunes while she's trying to talk to me. Like it was awful. It was awful. So it got to a point really where I had to make a choice. So, I mean, I'd like to have one of those stories where it's like, oh, I discovered this amazing strategy and I read this book. It's like, no, I came down to this or that. And so, because I knew there was one moment where, things got really, really bad. And I just knew it was like, I have to choose. And so oh gosh, sorry, I've never told this story. Like I said, I'm getting a little shaky. I chose my family. And I remember that moment. I went into the theater, and I climbed up on the set. There was no one else in there, and I just sat on top of the set and I just cried.
Mm-hmm.
And because I was giving up something that I really, really loved, but I knew it was the right choice. So it was probably one of the hardest decisions I've ever had to make. Just to walk away from this thing that. Like I to this day, I love that whole musical thing. I love directing. I've got a gift for it. And I've told you in our previous conversation, I'm not really big on self-promotion. I'm terrible at it, but that's one thing I'll claim. I am great at directing. So it was hard to walk away from that, all this work and all this effort, knowing that was going to be the last one I did. So I haven't done a musical since. And honestly, it was tough, but every year when it came around, even though I felt that draw towards the musical, because it's still going strong, still doing amazing work. But I am so happy I did what I did. I don't regret that decision for a moment, even though it's been hard. So how did I overcome it? I simply walked away because that was the right choice. So there you go.
Yeah, sometimes we have to draw the line and take care of ourselves, take care of our families first and foremost. I love that story, and thank you so much for your courage and sharing it, Shane. I'm thinking about takeaways because I'm thinking about other drama teachers out there. I spoke to the one at our high school, and he told me that the musical that we just put on this past year basically wrecked him for 6 months, and it wrecked his marriage. It wrecked his emotional health. He was some of the same things. I don't think he was working 100 hours a week, but he talked about driving all over the place on weekends to find props, to find things for the set, and it just consumes. So I guess my question is, speaking to principals and leaders of schools, what can schools do to continue to put on amazing musicals, but protect their teachers a little better?
That's a great question. I mean, it's going to come down, I think, ultimately, like for me, and I can only speak from me. For me, I haven't read any studies or anything else, but I mean, ultimately, what I want as a teacher, and it's not just in musicals, it's in my career. From my end, I want support. I want them to, at the very least, just be like, "How you doing? Are you okay? What can we do to help?" Right? If I had one person in that time, I mean, I don't want to oversell this. I had like a choreographer. I had someone doing costumes for me. But when you're the director, you are the filter through which all things go. And that makes you a very busy person. So, but just having someone else just step in and just, pull me away from that for a moment, or just check in on mental health. I mean, when I was doing that, it was 2008. I mean, none of these conversations that we're having now about mental health, they weren't even around, right? Except on the far, far fringes. It certainly wasn't like what we have now. So I think that would have been nice just to have a champion in my corner, just checking in on my personal health. Someone brave enough to step up and say, "Hey, you're not doing good," right? So how how that would have looked in the moment, I really don't know, because I mean, it would have been kind of like trying to, stand in front of a train and just, stop it with your own body. It just,
So what happened to the production that you were involved with? Like, did someone step in?
No, I saw it through to the end. But the decision, the agreement, whatever that my wife and I came to was that this is it. This is the last one. And so, side note, it's been, I guess, 12 years. And just recently, my wife was like, you know what, if you want to go back and do musicals now, like you're in a good enough place that you could do that. So not this year, but maybe next year I'll be putting my hat back in the ring to do those again. So we'll see.
Wow. Well, one step at a time, and listen to those signs, I guess, in terms of your own health, your emotional health, your family life, your marriage, and all those things. And yeah, I do think, I think your story is so powerful and so relevant, Shane, because we end up in places where we are burning out, or we're closer to burning out than on fire for education. And teachers have to share that message that it is okay to step out. It's okay to dial it down. And it's none of this business is worth our health and our families, right?
100%, my friend. 100%. I totally agree. And I feel like now that I know that, going forward, I know I can do a better job.
Cool. Well, I look forward to hearing about that, Shane. And I know you're not a blogger per se, but this is going to make for a good book, I think, at some point. You never know.
As I like to say on Twitter, coming out in 2030.
There you go.
Watch for it in bookstores.
Shane, in 2014, you launched the Ed podcast, and I believe you're now well over 100 episodes in. Can you tell us more about your why and your what? What's your mission, and what can educators expect to hear when they tune into the Ed podcast?
I started podcasting, honestly, just because it seemed like a good idea. It just seemed like fun. And it was, and it still is. The moment it's not fun, I quit. I'm done. Not to say that it's not work. It is. But my goal ultimately now, it's been a process of discovery, and very much let's jump out of the plane, build the parachute on the way down kind of guy. So for better, for worse, sometimes it's great, sometimes not so much. But I've discovered that as I'm going, it's like what I really want to do is expand the conversation about teaching and about education. I want to actually expand people's definition of education. That's where I really want to head in the coming year, actually, is I'm trying to push out beyond just regular classroom teachers and find educators in other contexts. So that's kind of where I'm going. So we'll see. So when people tune in, they can expect to just hear, casual, unscripted conversations with other educators about the things that they're passionate about. So whatever that happens to be, we'll just dive into it. And, I'm not trying to boil teaching down to lists or inspirational quotes, as my Twitter profile would say, because I think teaching is more complex than that. I just want to edify the community of teachers so that we can all sort of feel a part of a whole and just get better with each other.
Shane, when you started in 2014, I bet you had a favorite podcast at the time, or some podcast, or maybe a few podcasts that really sort of kindled your imagination for what was possible in terms of the Ed podcast. Can you recall what some of your favorite podcasts at the very beginning were?
Wow, that's going back always. I've been listening to them for a long time. I think around that time, the ones that I would have been listening to, the very first podcast I ever listened to was a show on movies called Battleship Pretension, and that was my gateway drug. And it's just like two guys chatting about movies in a pretentious way, and it was fun. What else was listening to? Here's the thing, Tim. I'm probably not going to give you the answer that you're looking for, because I actually wasn't into education podcasts. I honestly didn't start listening to them until probably, I'm going to say, a couple of years ago. I didn't really get into. My interests are just. I'm one of these people. I'm just interested in just everything. So at the time, it was Battleship Pretension. It was Welcome to Night Vale was one I was really into. And then the one that I still on my playlist today is 99% Invisible, because I think everyone listens to that one, and I really enjoy it. So
I do not listen to 99% Invisible, so maybe I need to start.
Yeah, join the club, man.
We all, well, I find it so interesting to ask that question, because we all have different pathways as edu podcasters. We all sort of got into this, I think, because we really, really admired the work of other podcasters and publishers out there.
Yeah.
The one I listen to, I've probably been listening to for over a decade, if podcasts are even that old, is the Dave Ramsey Show. I don't know if you've ever heard of him.
I've heard of it.
Yeah, he's basically a financial guy, and what you're basically listening to is his call-in radio show. So it's not even necessarily the best made for podcast content, but I just found that so interesting, and that got me comfortable with the medium. And then over the years, like you, Shane, I got more into, well, I guess not the movie side, but I got into the entrepreneurship side. And when you listen to voices like John Lee Dumas and Pat Flynn and Gary Vee and others, it's not an education space, but I tell you, they are big fans of content creation. And so that's really where I started to get the vision for, hey, why can't we duplicate this in the education space? And at the time when I launched, I couldn't find too many education podcasts out there. And of course, as you stay in these circles, as I'm sure you've found, there just seems to be more and more and more of them, right?
So many.
It's an army. I'm sure they're in the hundreds now, but it's a lot of fun, and I love your vision. I share a lot of that myself as well. Shane, let's talk about your computer courses. Can you give me a sense of some of the units you cover and some of your favorite apps and platforms? I'd definitely like to hear about any coding that's happening. I'm still trying to get better in that space, but yeah, tell us what's going on in your computer classes.
Basically, Tim, you're asking me to out myself. I don't feel like I'm doing a great job of the computer thing. I'm trying. I'm failing a lot too. It's a new thing to me. I taught it for 2 years now.
Okay.
So I feel like my pattern of teaching classes is in the first year, I usually just kind of pick up what was left behind by the previous teacher, try and get a sense of what they're doing and just kind of work my way through that. Second year, I start kind of fiddling with the knobs and buttons and trying to switch things up.
Right.
And it usually makes a bunch of stuff explode. And then third year is like, aha. So this coming year is going to be my aha year.
Right,
this is going to be the year that it's going to hit. And I can tell you that it will. Just because of the trajectory things have gone on. So that's how I justify my terrible teaching. So yeah, I'm figuring it out. I teach grade 7 and 8. Now we always work with some just basic Google stuff. I know this is going to sound like pretty boring, but next year I am teaching them file management. I'm going to teach them the difference between cloud storage and local storage, because as we get further into some of the bigger tools that we're using that I'll talk about in a second, trying to explain how a computer stores information inside the box is really mysterious to them. They don't quite see it because, for kids my age, it's been cloud all the way, right? So, I have kids that'll be working on something in Photoshop, and then they'll switch computers between classes and they say, I can't find my project. I'm like, well, which computer were we on last class? I'm like, that one, does that matter? I'm like, yeah. So I want to teach really like some just nitty gritty basics. But yeah, we do the Google stuff all the time. So that's just getting them, they're familiar with the environment coming out of, grade 6. But this is just getting them a little more comfortable with like the classroom environment. And that's really gone through some big revisions too in the last couple of months. So
That's true.
Yeah, just getting them familiar with all that. And also, one thing I started teaching a lot more this year is helping them to get information from like their phone to classroom and that sort of thing and into Photoshop. So kind of teaching them interoperability. That's been a big thing for me just because of the kind of stuff that I like to teach them or teach with them. So yeah, we do the Adobe suite. You want coding? We do a little bit of coding. It's not, I would say, a strong suit for me. We do a little bit of Scratch. We do this other thing called KoDoo. I don't know. Have you ever used that before?
No.
It's something that Microsoft puts out, and it's the moment you load it up, the first thing your kids are going to say is, "Oh, Minecraft," because it kind of looks like that. You're immediately in a 3D space. And then you have these different characters. The main character is called KoDoo. And then there's some basic coding that you can do with your KoDoo. So you can sorry, I just knocked something over. You can, just waving my hands around. You can do, you can create like a racing game. You can create quests. You can create like, a maze. You can just do simple exploration, fetch quests, that kind of thing. It's a pretty straightforward thing to get into, but it actually does have a lot of layers of complexity. So the kids enjoy that because, immediately you can start making something that they can see.
Right.
So that they find is really beneficial. And, you can shoot missiles, right? So, hey, who doesn't want to shoot missiles at each other, right? So it's been my goal the last couple of years to just try and actually create a good, arena shooter. So I'm getting there. So so that's the big one that we've been doing. Yeah.
I love that. I have not used KoDoo, and I look forward to checking it out. So thank you for that, Shane. I'll return the favor and say Khan Academy is a really good platform for walking kids through different coding languages. And the way Khan Academy is set up, the kids sort of learn at their own pace, and they move through one lesson at a time. And you don't really need to do too much as a teacher. You don't have to be the savior. They can figure it out as they go. So I like Khan Academy as a coding platform as well. But I love the sounds of what you're doing in the Adobe suite and in the G suite. And I agree. I think some of those basics of just how to manage your drive and your calendar and email, some of those things we overlook as educators, but they're essential skills, and the kids need to be walked through those. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, and one of the other things I do too, because we're still using, we have tower computers like desktops. So one of the things I always have to do at the start of the year is I always get there's always an old one lying around. So I'll just kind of sit up at the front, just get like a little wireless webcam in there. And so put it up on the screen, and I'll just start taking it apart and showing them all the bits and pieces of it. This goes in here. This is where the video goes. This is where the audio goes. This is power. This is, here's your CPU. Here's a hard drive. It's just kind of, I've done, by the end of the class, it's like the whole thing just laid out in pieces, and then I put it back together and do it again for the next class. But they always think it's kind of cool too, because they get to see inside this thing, like, ooh. And but the thing is too, it's also helps me because inevitably, I'm teaching junior high, and so some kid will walk by some other computer and they'll unplug it, or they'll change the cables. So this way they know how to fix things. So
right.
My standard line in class now is if something's wrong, they're like, well, my monitor's not working. I'm like, well, what did you do? Nothing. Well, then fix it.
Mm-hmm.
Can't you help me? Did you try anything? Nope. Then fix it.
Troubleshooting, very valuable skill.
Yes, absolutely.
Now, is your school a one-to-one, do students have devices at their desk?
Grade 9 through 12, we're 7 through 12, but grade 9 through 12 is BYOD. And then 7 and 8, no, I teach computers class, so I've got computers for all of them. So,
right.
And I mean, come on, all the kids have got phones. So, or a vast majority of them, at least in the environment. I teach in a fairly affluent environment. I'm not going to lie. So yeah, most kids have got phones.
Sure. Well, that would change the environment for me quite a bit. I'm in 8th grade, and we are a BYOD environment as well. But because of that, I'm able to put just about all of my work and assignments, or run all of it through Google Classroom. And I would shudder at the thought of going back. Maybe that sounds terrible to some, but I really, really like what it's done to my shoulders, not having to carry backpacks full of papers back and forth between home and school. And it certainly simplified things. And, for those students who struggle with organization, it's been a huge bonus. I've got a son here at home who I know has benefited immensely from Google Classroom. So
yeah. Well, we do all our stuff through Classroom as well, even in grade 7 and 8.
Oh, you do? Okay. So how do students submit assignments if they don't have laptops at their desk?
Well, we have several Chromebook carts. So if they're not in the computer lab, then you just get one of those things, you wheel them in, because you don't need them every day, depending on what you're doing. So yeah. And I mean, like my drama classes, I think I put like 2 things per semester on Classroom, like just about nothing. Usually it's just recordings of their projects. And I just say, here you go, here's your stuff. Right? But yeah, other than that, so it works. It works.
Shane, as you look across your PLN and your own practice, what is really setting you on fire about education today? This could be a macro level answer or something right there on the micro level happening in your classroom.
Okay. So I'm not really an on fire kind of guy. Like I'm not the guy that runs to the hallways like, yeah, go, woo. Like I'm not that dude. But I think for me, it's more like a slow burn. And this is something I'm only coming to realize over the last couple of years. It's like, I realize that I have a lot of experience. And so every day I get a little bit more new experience, and that kind of just contributes to, my own practice daily. So that there's no one, running by who's like dumping gas on me and lighting fire, to be in a metaphorical sense. So but the big fuel for me is just the conversation. Yeah, on my podcast, sure, but I mean, just in the digital space, just getting into the kinds of topics and the kinds of just ideas being thrown around online. That has been the big fuel for me, to be honest. Just being able to, I mean, sure, I'll be a broken record. Twitter, right? That's what everyone says. But I mean, it's such a great environment where I can always go, and people are talking about just all things education, and that is such an inspiration for me. And again, it's not, I'm not finding any one particular moment where I'm like, yeah, that's the most amazing thing. I'm going to, completely change everything I'm doing, but it's just adding to my own experience and practice. So I find things that I can take into my classroom and try out, or I can say, oh, there's something that didn't go well. I'm not going to do that, whatever it is. So that's kind of what's keeping me going from day to day. That and coffee.
Amen to that. Are you a Twitter chat kind of guy, Shane?
I try to when I can. Typically, they tend to happen over supper time and bath time for my kids, so it's a little bit tough. But there's been a couple of days where I'll just throw my kids in the tub and throw some toys at them and say, go. I'm going to go. I'll like squeeze in like 20 minutes of a Twitter chat and then come back. But I do when I can, for sure. I really enjoy those.
Shane, how are you looking to grow professionally and improve your practice next year? Can you share about a specific professional goal or maybe some kind of a project that you're currently working on?
Well, for me, it's the big thing for me is the art class that I'm teaching, because I have not,
right.
I haven't taught art before. So thank goodness the people who come before me have been very good at laying everything out. So like I said, that first year is going to be just, trying to set up my own way of doing things based off of all the stuff that they've created. So I think that's going to be good. But I mean, it's honestly for me, it's just diving in somewhere where my brain is just like, well, you're going to die. But I just have to sort of ignore that and just go for it. So I'm looking to grow in that. I'm just trying to challenge myself. And I think this is really going to stretch me this year.
That's good to hear. I look forward to checking in with you. And just remember the power of yet. I'm not a good art teacher yet. You'll get there.
Here's hoping.
Outside of education, Shane, what's another area of learning for you? And I love asking this question because I think it pulls back the curtains on who you are as a human being. So what else is igniting your passions outside of the classroom and the school?
Oh, so I think I mentioned this before. I like way too many things. I mean, if I look at my podcast feed, I've got stuff about computer games. I got stuff about screenwriting, design, just like straight up personal interest interviews. We've got true crime. It's all over the place. Architecture. So, and these are all passions of mine. I often say, I wish I had like another couple of lifetimes to live, because I could just go back to school and I would just love to just get degree after degree after degree. I would love to do that. But life ain't like that. So here we are. So in terms of like just day-to-day stuff that I have time to kind of fit into my daily schedule, because we're all busy people. I picked up the ukulele last year, and it's something I've literally been wanting to do since I was like 8. Because my grandpa got me into this one sort of novelty artist from the 1930s named George Formby, and I loved listening to that stuff. And I was like, and he always just plays the ukulele. So I did. My mom had a ukulele that she bought when she was like 18, and she's like, well, I haven't played it in 30 years. You take it. So I started playing it and just kind of got addicted. I actually have it with me at work, so I'll like be walking around the classroom just strumming my uke, talking with my kids, and always been a great point of connection for them, but I love it. So that's been something that I've kind of really relaxes me. If I had a really stressful day at the end of the day, I'll just pick up my uke and just play for a few minutes, and just everything just kind of melts away. And the other thing, of course, is film is a real passion for me. So I love just learning about film and just watching, trying to find other aspects of sort of the film timeline and explore those as well. So yeah, those two things.
Very fun. I bet the students love the uke, as you put it.
Some of them do.
Share about a personal habit or productivity hack that contributes to your success, Shane. I love what you shared earlier about drawing boundaries with your time. Mm-hmm. What is it for you that keeps you on track?
Well, it's grace. I'll boil it down to a word: grace. I am, I haven't talked about this on my podcast in a long time, but I am definitely, one of those people who self-diagnosed, I definitely suffer from imposter syndrome. That idea, like everyone's going to find out at some point that I'm just faking it and I don't know what I'm doing. So, but I've learned just again through the conversation that's happening online and through conversations I've had with educators is just to give myself some grace. And I know that doesn't seem like a productivity hack, but when you are in a space where you think, well, I'm no good at this and people are going to find out. And it's just, it can be really crippling. It can be, kind of prevent you from going out and trying things. So now, grace is my productivity hack. Just have the personal grace to, just try something. And if it fails, learn from it. Don't just say, oh, well, and try something different, but just take your time, try it again, learn some more, try it again, learn some more, try it again. I've been teaching my high school film studies class for 5 years. I would say this is the first year where I'm just like, yeah, I got it. This is the year. I mean, I've been doing a good job every year. And again, that's the grace that I have for myself. I know I have, but this is the year where I was like, yeah, I got it. Right. And that makes me more productive because I've taken the time to just sort of learn and slow down and just have the grace to know that I can get better as long as I keep moving forward.
I think a lot of times in this business of education, we are our own worst critics, right? And so I love that one. That's a first on the podcast, and I really, really appreciate it. Yeah. All right, Shane, it's time for your quick picks, the education voices and resources that are shaping your practice and inspiring your thinking today. So starting at Twitter, and we talked about the power of Twitter just as a place of ongoing professional conversation. Tell us about someone we should follow there and share why they've been inspiring you lately.
Okay, I'm probably like all your guests. I could probably list off 10, 20 people, but my pick for one is Jen Binnis, Jen with 2 N's. She's at Ed History 101, I think, or at Jen Binnis. I'll get you that. But she is big into Ed history. She did a podcast on it, which just sucked me right in. And so I wound up having some great conversations with her. I've had her on my podcast twice now. And she's one of these people who is always looking at things with a critical eye. And I love that about her, just that, she's not going to take things at face value. She's always asking, why, or what are your sources, or stuff like this. So she's really big into just, rigor and always, comparing one idea against another. She's not just out there just swallowing everything. So I really like Jen Binnis a lot. She's great.
She models the critical thinking. I like it. Shane, point us to an edtech tool that you currently love using in your classroom or somewhere in your professional practice.
Okay, so I'm going to continue my trend of just dodging your questions or twisting them. Sorry.
Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah, so I'm not a fan of edtech tools. What I mean by that is it's kind of like asking, someone building a house. It's like, well, what's your favorite tool? If they're doing, plumbing, they're not going to say, well, a hammer, or so it's whatever's needed in the moment. Sure. That's my favorite edtech tool. I'm a fan of whenever I can, and I don't always, but whenever I can, giving kids authentic, worthwhile tasks, because when you do that, the tools present themselves. It's not to mean that I'm just giving kids, a task and then saying, there you go. But a lot of times, sometimes what we'll do is say, okay, here's what we want to do. What are some tools we have? And we'll just make a great big list on the whiteboard of all the things that are available. So it totally depends on the task. Now, I'll undercut myself completely by saying that this past year, the one thing that really surprised me the most in terms of edtech tools, if you want to do it, is phones. Phones were just... Oh, and that's a dicey area where I teach. I don't know what it's like for you, but just honestly, do not take away my kids' phones. They need them. Not every day. And yeah, there's days where I'm just like, hey, put that away. You don't need that right now. There's definitely still that, and it's still an issue, but it's nothing that is destroying my classroom environment. And there's days where it's just like, I've gotten after kids. I'm like, where's your phone? Go get your phone. Why is it in your locker? You need it, so there's been that too. So, and a lot of that has to do with just, they've been filming stuff and recording audio. We did radio plays this year, which were great. They built their own sound effects and they used Audition to create radio plays, which was fantastic. But I mean, yeah, that's been the number one thing. And then, beyond that is just whatever we need for the moment. a lot of times kids bring tools to me that I didn't even know about, right? So, this year I learned about, Soundtrap or Splice.com, which is really great for building like rap beats. So we had some kids doing some like raps and that kind of thing. Fusion 360, if you have a kid who's like really into 3D modeling and they're bored with Tinkercad, and it's like, well, here, try this. And it's insane. It's like professional level and it's free for students. So
Wow.
awesome. Yeah. So I had one kid use that this year and he built himself a 3D printed skateboard.
Wow.
So yeah.
Wow. Incredible. Well, those are some great tools, and I completely agree with your philosophy around phones, Shane. I wrote a blog post earlier this year called On Schools and Cell Phones, and it got a fair bit of play. But basically, I'm trying to explore where should schools be coming out on phones, because some schools are really struggling with all of the negatives that we associate with phone use. But at the end of it, I conclude that it has to be a messy middle space. I mean, yes, we have to be mindful and manage these devices effectively. But on the other hand, I don't think a ban is the way to go. It just cuts out too much that is good. And so I like where you're going by saying that these are powerful tools. Let's not get rid of them completely, but use them intentionally, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree.
Shane, recommend one book, one that you've been reading lately, or maybe one of your all-time faves, and tell us why you recommend it.
Okay, well, I'll choose one that's definitely education focused. It's called Creativity. It's not education focused. What am I saying? It's called Creativity Inc. It's useful in the creativity space. Creativity Inc. by Ed Catmull. He used to be the president of Pixar, and honestly, the what drew me to the book is because I mean my film studies class. There it is again. But I run it like a production studio. So when we started, it's like I tell the kids like I'm your teacher kind of, but I'm the executive producer, right? So I'm the one who runs the studio. You are directors, producers, writers. So I try to, I don't just meet with my kids. We have production meetings, all this kind of stuff. So we try and keep it as professional as possible. But learning how to run that kind of environment has been a real process of trial and error, and a lot of error. So reading this book, Creativity Inc., it's all about that. It's all about sort of team management in a creative environment. So just reading it, it's just like, it is an absolute bullseye for me where I'm at with what I teach. And I don't think it would be for most teachers. You'd kind of have to take it. And there's a lot of useful information. You can kind of treat it in a metaphor. It's like, well, when he's talking about this, I could sort of make it work in this context. So it is really good if you want to just learn about managing people who are responsible for creative output. And it's fantastic. I'm only about halfway through, but I'm loving it.
I look forward to taking a look at that one. And if you are listening and you're trying to scribble all of these recommendations down, make sure you take a look at teachersonfire.net. I'll have all of these resources that Shane is mentioning listed there. Shane, tell us about a podcast that you've got near the top of your deck, one of your regular go-tos. And hey, between edu podcasters, we're first and foremost fans of this medium. So I'm sure this is a tough one, but tell us about one that is a go-to for you.
Well, I'm gonna list one that, I mean, there's probably a lot I could mention that your listeners are already gonna know. So I'm gonna go for a bit more of a dark horse, just to try and expand people's experience, which is CBC makes a podcast called Uncover, and it's investigative journalism, long form, kind of like Serial, if you want, sort of a touchstone to kind of understand. They've done 3 seasons, but I mean, far and away, season 1 is just incredible. I think they're like 6-7 episodes each, and it's called Escaping Nexium, and it's all about this crazy sort of personal improvement cult, and it's bonkers and fascinating. And I mean, I binged it hard. It's so good. It's so good. So it's not educational, but it's fascinating. It's fascinating.
Well, it sounds like something my 2 teenage boys might get into on our daily commute, so thank you for that. They get a little tired of the constant stream of education podcasts that I usually listen to. CBC's Uncover. Tell us about a YouTube channel that you're subscribed to, Shane, and this one might be one that you rely on in the classroom, or again, one that you just find personally amusing.
Well, if you'll indulge me, I got one of each. So how about that?
Sure.
So for my sort of educational one, which I also do, really enjoy, it's called Smarter Every Day. And it's this guy down in I should know where he is. But anyways, he's just a naturally curious guy. He's, older. He's a little older than I am, which makes him kind of unusual in the YouTube space. He is a test flight engineer. So he's like sort of basically a rocket scientist, if you want to put it that way. And he just explores just all sorts of like sciencey kind of stuff, but in a really relatable, fun way. Like he did this one really cool episode on cat flipping. That's kind of what put him on the scene. It's an older one now, but just how cats flip,
right,
and how that works. And then but he talks about how they actually studied cats, and then incorporated what they learned into satellite navigation systems. Believe it or not. So yeah, they've got this hilarious video of like Russians testing cats in zero gravity, which is pretty awesome. And I mean, all the stuff he does, fantastic. And then the amusing one that I'm just completely lost on, and it's just pablum, it's just useless, but it's Screen Rant's pitch meetings, which are just go look it up. They're fun.
Okay. Last question, Shane, strictly non-educational on this one, but I'm interested to hear your thoughts as a film guy. Just for fun, what are you watching on Netflix right now?
Well, I don't have a lot of time to watch a lot of stuff on Netflix, to be totally honest, other than the occasional like comedy special or whatever. But the last kind of series that I just burned through was Russian Doll, which was it's only 7 or 8 episodes long. And each one's like 22 minutes. So it's a quick in and out, which for me with 2 young kids and, busy life, it's perfect. And it's basically Groundhog Day. Well, it's got the same premise in that a woman keeps dying and waking up at a party, same party over and over and over again. Similarities kind of end there because it goes in a really different direction. It's pretty dark, but it's a blast. It's so good. It's so good. So highly recommend.
That sounds like a title that might fit on my profile and not my wife's. She's got a low tolerance for scary and dark, but I think I would enjoy that. Shane, what are the best ways for the listeners to follow you and connect with what is happening at the Ed Podcast?
The best way for people to get hold of me always is on Twitter. I'm at the Ed Podcast. That's kind of where I live my life. I also have my website, theedpodcast.podbean.com, with all my episodes and everything else. I'm on Instagram, not particularly active there, but that's also at the Ed Podcast. I think I'm on Voxer, also at the Ed Podcast. This is new. I don't know.
We've Voxed a little bit, so you're definitely on Voxer.
I'm in the club. All right. I still have no idea how to use it, but yeah, okay, I'm there, and I have a YouTube channel, but again, that's pretty dormant.
Sounds good, Shane. Again, thank you so much for sharing your time with the podcast today. It's been particularly fun to connect with another edu podcaster, and one that I've been seeing on Twitter for a long time. So to be able to chat with you in real time is a real privilege and honor today. Take care, Shane, and let's talk again soon.
It's been a blast, Tim. Thanks.
Thanks for joining me today here on the Teachers on Fire podcast. For show notes and links from this episode, visit teachersonfire.net. You can also follow the show at Teachers on Fire on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And again, please do subscribe to the show wherever you listen to podcasts. Before we sign off today, I'd love to share some highlights from around the Teachers on Fire community this week. First of all, I want to invite you to leave any questions, suggestions, or feedback to the show in the form of a voice message. You can do so by locating Teachers on Fire in the Anchor app, or if you're on Voxer, leave me a message at Tim Cavey. Either way, I'd be thrilled to hear from you and feature your message in a future episode. Attention education bloggers and readers of great education blogs. I've launched a new podcast called the Teacher Blogs Podcast, a podcast for teachers who have more time to listen to blog posts than to read them. The mission of this podcast is to amplify the voices of education writers that are seen, read, but need to be heard. It's easy to participate as a writer. All you need to do is use your phone's voice memo app to record yourself reading your own published blog post. Then use the share button to email that voice file to teacherblogspodcast@gmail.com. If you've written a blog post that you'd like me to consider featuring there, please message me at teacher_blogs on Twitter. Next, speaking of Twitter, I'd like to thank all those who encourage and support the podcast there. Anik Roke recently tweeted, "This was pretty awesome. Not only did I get to meet Mr. KV, but our families also got to spend some time together at Lynn Canyon. Great views, freezing cold water, but warm hearts." Yes, Anik, I would agree. Very cold water, but a beautiful day, and what a special opportunity it was for us to connect in person and to bring our families together as well. Anik was a former guest of the podcast, and fortunately for me, she was in town in the Vancouver area for a family wedding, and so we had the opportunity of connecting in person. And what a beautiful family she's got, 4 great boys and some wonderful parents and siblings as well. So it was great to connect there. At Sandra McCauley 72 tweeted, "Hey, Rose Pillay, I'm catching up on all the Teachers on Fire. You're amazing." Obviously, listening to the episode that Rose was featured in. Rose Pillay, a former guest on Teachers on Fire, and she replied, "Happy Summer Monday, Sandra McCauley 72. Thank you for listening to my rambling. Great way to spend the summer with at Teachers on Fire podcast by Mr. KV. By the way, here's the post-podcast reflection I wrote about the experience." And Rose drops a link to her blog post at teachafl.wordpress.com. She includes the entire URL, but let me point you, dear listener, to teachafl.wordpress.com, and that AFL stands for Assessment for Learning. You will enjoy Rose's inspiration, her insights, her humor, her love of people, and her educational advice. I promise you will be provoked to further learning and growth in your own practice. So make sure you check that out. I'm not just saying that because Rose shouted me out or because she was a former guest on the podcast. She is genuinely a wonderful, wonderful writer and thinker in education. And then finally, at Joshua_Stamper tweeted, "Thank you, Tim. I'm loving the content you are putting out on Teachers on Fire. Keep up the great work. #AspireLead." And again, Josh is another former guest of the podcast, but he's become much more than that as a great friend and confidant and partner here in this edu podcast business, if you could call it a business. And I'm learning so much from him. His podcast over at Aspire features education leaders, and I listened to another great episode today. I'm so thankful for him and for his work. So thank you for that, Joshua. Thank you, all of you, Anik, Sandra, Rose, and Josh. You 4 were the fuel to my fire this week. And if you see me around on Twitter, and if you've connected with my tweets in any way, whether it was through a like or a response or a retweet, whatever it was, thank you so much for that encouragement. I'm so happy to be growing from my PLN there on Twitter. I will also invite you, dear listener, to check out the Teachers on Fire magazine on Medium, where you will find some awesome writing. We talked earlier about blog posts. This week we featured, by yours truly, the 9 A's of Awesome Lesson Planning, 2 articles by Dr. Sam Fessich, one called So You Want to Be a Teacher, the second called Flexing Those EdTech Muscles, and then an additional piece by Lynn Thomas called Ready, Set, Climate Action. If you're wondering how to find the Medium publication, it's located at medium.com. Or you can find it on the Medium app on a mobile device. If you're already an education blogger, consider joining our growing writing team there. You can continue to publish content on your own blog, and you keep full credit and ownership of your content on Medium. Message me at Teachers on Fire on any social media platform for more details. One last thing, something I've not done a very good job of in terms of promoting this podcast is asking my listeners to leave reviews of the show on Apple Podcasts. So if you are listening on an iPhone right now, would you kindly leave me a 5-star rating and let me know what you appreciate most about the show? I'd be incredibly grateful and would love to shout you out in this space in a future episode. Thank you so much for that. And by the way, Android Nation, I'm not forgetting about all of you wonderful people and all the other many platforms and apps you might be listening on. including but not limited to Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Overcast, Podbean, Breaker, or my personal favorite at the moment, Castbox. The reason so many edu podcasters mention Apple Podcasts, and I do have an iPhone myself, is simply that for better or for worse, Apple is far and away the king of the podcast world. So their ratings and rankings do make a difference, and they help me get discovered. So your rating helps a lot. Thank you so much for doing that. Again, I am your host, Tim Cavey, and I'm so grateful that you decided to spend some of your day listening to this podcast. I hope that in some way the content you heard today and some of the thoughts shared by our guest, Shane Lawrence, ignited your thinking and inspired your practice. And I'll meet you next week right here on the Teachers on Fire podcast.